we have a great mix of people here today. I would like to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to be moderating for today's event. So to my immediate left, we have Matt from Madison Consulting Services, Maria Granville. Moving further left from the New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants, we have Kimberly Ann, or you can call her Kim Chambers. And then all the way in the corner, we have Paula Collins, also from the New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants. The New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants and Madison Consulting Services are partners of either Justice Foundation or Harlem. With that said, I'd like to give each of our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves and share information about what they do. The title of today's event is Cannabis Accounting, a panel discussion and a lightning round coaching. We will have a panel for approximately an hour. There will be an opportunity for you as our guests to ask questions. And then we're going to move into a lightning round coaching session. So if you have individual questions to ask our accountants or our consultants, that you may do so at that time. So now I'm going to hand off to Maria. Please share more about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you guys for coming and taking your time to get more information or as much information as you can. My name is Maria Granville. My company name is Madison Consulting Services Incorporated. We are primarily a technology management consulting organization, but as such, we do a lot of business development and business organization. We are here to talk about finances, and I will give you as much information as I can that I know of about running a company and the financial aspects of running a company, separate and distinct from my esteemed colleagues who are accountants and attorneys. And they are two of the most valuable, accountants and attorneys, two of the most valuable professionals you can have on speed dial. So what do? I do business management. I tell you how to run your company. First thing, have your accountant and your attorney on speed dial. Next person is your marketing person. Have them on speed dial. Okay, maybe your white website person. There's a few web speed dials that you want. All right, so that's what I do. And thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Okay, my name is Kimberly Ann Chambers. You can call me Kim. I am a founding member of the New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants. But I also have my company, which is Bill Tax Pros. I am an enrolled agent, which is often confused for a CPA. It's not what I am. I am the highest certified individual for the IRS. I advocate for people who have tax issues in front of IRS and state authorities. I've been involved in the cannabis industry since about 2017. A lot of my experience is on the West Coast, interning and just learning the effects of just how 280E is handled and the effects on our businesses as well. So I'm very excited that we're finally legal and it's here, and I'm here to support anyone that needs help.
Thank you so much. Paula, last but certainly not least, your introduction.
Thank you. I'm Paula Collins. I am an attorney and also an enrolled agent, as Kim mentioned, and I am a founding member and co-director of the New York Consortium of Cannabis Accountants. What I've been doing since about 2015 is following the market as it's moving across the nation. And the rules that apply right here are drastically different from if we were to get in a car or a boat and go over to New Jersey. And they vary from town to town even. And so the trick with cannabis is finding where you are and learning the rules in that particular place. and understanding that there's a bigger picture always. It's not just about the money and your business. There's, you know, why did government even want to do this? What was their motivation? What was the motivation of big business? How is all of this fitting together? And so as an attorney, I help people with operating agreements, like most people know to do an LLC. But I help people with operating agreements and contracts and vending agreements and looking at your lease, as well as just developing a sense of where you are in the whole landscape. I do believe that this is an opportunity, but more importantly, I feel that cannabis is an obligation. Because it's time to make it all right. For so long, there's just been so much wrong about how this plant was handled and how the people connected to the plant were treated. And so I find this is an obligation that we have to set it straight.
Thank you so much. I love how Paula closed out talking about the obligation, and that's why we talk about social justice, social equity, and social responsibility. The MRTA is the legislation that in the state of New York guides adult use cannabis. The MRTA in the preamble makes it clear that the intention is to create a program that provides remedy to those who are most significantly harmed by the criminalization of cannabis. So this is going to be an industry based on the vision for New York that includes people from different walks of life. So when we talk about social justice, it's about, you know, remedying that harm. It's about letting people out of prison who are, there are still people incarcerated for cannabis, and they shouldn't be, and making sure that there aren't any additional charges related to cannabis. When we talk about social equity, we're talking about making sure that there's an opportunity to participate and commercialize. And as Regina said, create that multi-generational wealth that other cultures have benefited from, that since cannabis legalization 20 plus years ago in other parts of the country, that we've seen mainstream America benefit economically from. It's time that opportunity is spread throughout the country, from a geographical diversity, from a gender diversity, from a racial and ethnicity diversity perspective. We want to make sure that there is equity. And then finally, social responsibility comes into place when we talk about, we are commercializing, we're seeing licensees make money, but how are they flowing those funds into our communities that were damaged by over enforcement and the war on drugs, which was a war on Black and brown individuals primarily. So I just wanted to start out there. So we're looking at the industry, and today the Cannabis Control Board finalized their rules with regards to the retail opportunity. They have released a mock application as well. So this is a big day for those who were wrongly affected by the war on drugs, those who were what they define as justice involved, meaning that they have not only a conviction, it's been expanded to an arrest, which is a huge victory from all the community activists that made sure that they expanded that definition to include an arrest or charge, not just a conviction related to cannabis. So today is a very big day, and we want to make sure that we are preparing our community to take part in this industry. So when you're looking to get into business, any business, formation is really critical. Formation is critical. We have the benefit of Maria here, who works with business on business development. And a big part of that is the formation aspect and getting it right from when you have the concept. And as she indicated, you need to have your consultant or business development person, you need to have your accountant, you need to have your attorney. But the first question has to do with formation. You have a concept, you have an idea, you see that these rules are finalized, and you're like, I've been doing this for all of my life. How do I do it in this legal setting? It's a little intimidating. Well, that's why we take experts from traditional business and we bring them into cannabis industry. Sometimes we have to educate them. Sometimes it's a hard movement for them because they know, the price that has been paid. And it's all about making sure that we bring everyone up to the speed where they have an opportunity to present a viable application. So I turn to you, Maria, and talk to you about formation. So as you're advising your clients for any business, let's start there. What are the things that they need to consider when they're trying to form as a business?
Well, in all honesty, it all really comes down to the type of business and taxes. So even though you talk to me, you still need to talk to a tax accountant. So why do I say that? Types of business. You have S corps, you have C corps, you have LLCs, and you have partnerships. Those are the four major. And feel free to jump in and
And I just want to add not-for-profits just because there is a carve out for not-for-profits in the regulations. So I'm gonna hand back to you.
That's exactly true. So the other ones that I was talking about are for-profit businesses, and then you do have nonprofits, and then even where that's concerned, you have 501. There's a bunch of numbers after the C. So, there are certain industries that tend towards certain organizational structure. For instance, real estate deals tend to be LLC versus corporations like consulting companies tend to be S corps or C corps if you're that big, but I'm not as big as an IBM, so I'm an S corp. And then you have, attorneys who are professionals, LPCs, right? Licensed professionals, even doctors and things, but sometimes licensed professionals. So the first thing you do is the business formation. Last time I checked, and again, feel free. Okay, last time I checked, we sort of decided that an LLC was the best organizational structure, but you still have to look at that because now you have to look at where you're getting your money from. And are you going to have to issue shares? Because now you're talking about a corporation.
Well, I think I want to add to that. There's definitely different structures that fit different scenarios, different situations. You have to look at the whole picture, and tax is very important. Any other entity like a LLC, a S corp, even a partnership, those are considered pseudo companies. They are pass-through entities, meaning that the tax burden is passed to you as an individual. Now, with cannabis companies, it's predetermined you're going to pay high tax because you pay at the gross profit instead of net profit. So all your SG&A, which is, your general expenses as a business, if you're a business owner, they're not deductible. So you're paying at the gross profit margin, even though your bank doesn't reflect that, that money's been spent. That's what you're paying at. So if you are passing that tax burden onto you personally, that may be a situation you may want to weigh heavily. Now, a corporation, if it's a corporation, the corporation is an existing entity per se. You birth a corporation, kind of, it's its own person. So they pay tax. So if you become successful in your business, and again, you're paying at that gross profit margin, you may have made $1 million at that gross profit. When it dwindled down, it might have been 80,000 net, but you're paying tax on that $1 million. That tax burden stays with that corporation. So if, say it becomes too burdensome, or it becomes a financial situation where you can no longer handle that business, that lives and dies with that corporation, that debt. If it's anything else, you got that bill, baby. So you gotta be careful with your selection.
So I'm gonna jump in here and say, and then toss it back to you, but I was in a meeting with the International Cannabis Bar Association Monday, And the remark was made, I don't know why any attorney in this country is directing cannabis owners to anything but a corporation. And it's exactly for that reason that Kim just talked about. Now, honestly, I, as an advisor, tend to steer people towards the LLC because it's easy. We can go online, click, bing, swipe your card, you're in business. Corporation, there are a few other steps. Also, there's a lot more management to the corporation, but remember that a cannabis business cannot go bankrupt. So you can't say, oops, 3 years into it, we're not making it, we're swimming in debt, we're gonna ask for protection from the United States Bankruptcy Court. Not available to a cannabis business. And so for that reason, it would be better to have everything housed and protecting you in that corporation. It's a lot harder to pierce that than it is the LLC. So enough from us. We'll go back to you.
No, absolutely. That was really good feedback.
I
Or would you like to add
actually
that?
ask if anyone has a question on what they just heard, but to summarize.
Yeah, I'm gonna wait till the end of the question.
Okay, just to summarize what we just heard, I mean, to bring it down to the bottom line. You have a corporation, they can't come after your cat or your son, okay? You don't, they're coming after your firstborn and your puppies. Okay?
Thank you for that guidance. And, let's say, hey, I started it as an LLC. I wanted to limit my liability. It was an easy start for me, but now I have an investor and they're directing me to form a corp or possibly some type of joint venture. So Paula, I'm going to direct that to you. Is it possible to convert from an LLC to start to a more complex formation type or entity type?
It definitely is possible to convert. Most often, as Cheryl indicated, that cue comes from somebody saying, hey, I would be interested in going in business with you, but I need a piece of that equity. And so that's usually what prompts it. And so while it is possible to convert, I usually recommend let's just dissolve that LLC and start a new corporation, if that's possible. I mean, a million different variations on how that could all work and what would prompt one versus the other. But rather than amending documents, I prefer to just start, let's have a corporation now.
And I would say that I completely agree with my colleague, and the only exception I can think of is if and again, we're in New York State, but if there's some type of aging residency requirement for how long that entity has been in operation or profitable or that type of thing, you may not want to dissolve that financial history and you may look at a conversion. But the best part about a conversion is it kind of, or not a conversion, of starting over, it cleans up. Let's say I had a partner 10 years ago, and then, I filed my annual renewal, and then we removed them, and then we've added people and removed them to the company over time. If you start a new entity, those people can't typically come back and say, hey, I'm supposed to be an owner because I was one of the original owners back in the day. So there is value in that, but every situation is different, which is why we're going to have those one-on-one sessions.
I can add that you can change it for tax purposes by filing a special form. But again, it's still partial protection. You could change it for tax purposes, file as a corporation for tax purposes, but you still have that limited liability aspect and it's still a pass-through entity under the layers of it. So those are considerations that you have to.
Okay, what about the client who says, I need an EIN number, everything's asking me for this number. How would your clients approach getting the EIN? And we'll talk about how significant it is for taxation purposes.
So an EIN is separate and distinct from a social security number, although they have the same number of digits, if I'm not mistaken. A social security number, as you know, is 3, 2, and 4. An EIN number is 2 and 7. Getting an EIN number, from my experience, has been very simple. So just to give you a little background, in 1990, I started my company as a sole proprietor, which is a legal definition for a company. With a DBA, which means doing business as. And you actually go downtown, you get a form, you say, I am Maria Grantham, but I'm going to do business as MGM. And MGM is the name of your business, even though it's really a sole proprietor. MGM and Maria Grantham are the same exact entities. But Maria Grantham has a social security number and MGM has an EIN number. And that is, you can go online, it's really actually very easy to get from the IRS. And that's what you use to file your taxes. That's how you identify your company. So your social security number identifies you and your EIN identifies your company. And it doesn't matter what type of company. So we talked about sole proprietorship just a little while ago, just now. S corps, C corps, LLCs, nonprofits, 501c X's. They can all have an EIN and it's all for tax purposes for the IRS.
Well, thank you for that. Let's talk about that a little bit more with, having an EIN and moving forward with an application. So if I wanted to formalize, I've got this concept, I have my partners, and we want to cement that we work together, that we're all owners. Is it enough just to get the EIN and the registration with the state? Or what is this operating agreement that I'm talking about? So let's talk about the state registration part of the entity is formed in New York versus these are our internal documents that indicate who owns what happens if somebody passes away, et cetera, and so on. So let's see if we can speak a little bit to that.
I'm going to turn those things over to my ladies on my right, left. But I will say, I have 3 companies. I have Purple Sky Development LLC. I have PM Squared LLC. Those are both real estate companies. And I have Madison Consulting Services Incorporated. That's an S corp, my first company. Okay. I have binders, books, like binders. Every time you start a company, and you actually form it legitimately, you're going to get a binder from either your attorney and or the state with your operating agreements, with a stamp, with a seal, with all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to turn the answer over here. But just to let you guys know, there's a lot of information that comes with actually legitimately forming a company.
And then what's being referenced is a corporate book, which I think it's really important. It details how often you meet as a company. There is a, so there's an interpretation that
3 times bigger than this.
sometimes, that your corporate book and the fact that you're meeting your records of your meetings make your company less of a, what we call a sham company. So, usually an attorney will instruct you to, at least if you have a company with shares, that you indicate the passing of the shares to the actual owners and things like that. But I want to go back to, that's a really good point. Thank you for mentioning it. But I want to go back to our prior.
Well, I almost want to back up even before then and talk about what are your goals as a business owner? What is your vision for your cannabis business? If that's what we're here to talk about, cannabis.
We'll get there, but right now I wanted to talk about formation, just so that we can have them understand how a company is formed, and then from there we can talk about the planning and the goal.
But so don't sit there on your phone and form a corporation while we're talking, because we've got more information to get to you before you do that, okay?
But you can't form a corporation online.
You can. You can literally sit there right now and say, do my business. But we've got a lot more to tell you before you actually form that corporation in terms of who you're getting into business with. And in terms of what is what are you hoping to accomplish in that business? And I think that's an important thing to know before you just form a corporation.
Also, when it comes to financials, corporations, you've heard the term equity. Does everyone really feel comfortable with that term? And I say that because I'm sitting up here as the expert, okay? But I had to get comfortable with that term. It may have been 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, but I had to get comfortable, even though I have an economics degree. So, does everyone feel comfortable with the term equity?
I think that's a really good segue to the
Mhm.
operating agreement conversation. So when we're talking about the documents of formation and talking about the operating agreement typically will indicate the equity that's owned by the people who have just agreed to come together in business. So I think it's really important that we talk about the operating agreement and how formation happens, and also some hazards, because what we've seen in other markets is sometimes there's an operating agreement that is presented to the individual, especially a social equity individual, and they don't realize what they're signing, what they're giving away, and they may not get what they expect to get. So I think that's a great point about equity. Let's talk a little bit about coming together as individuals to form one entity and incorporate equity into that conversation.
So that operating agreement would describe how the money moves through the organization to those, what we call equity positions. In other words, think of it, if all four of us were in business, are we each 25% owners? Or does one of us own 35% and the other owns 15% or what have you? How is that all divided? And does that equate with the profits as well as the liabilities? In other words, am I equally responsible for the bills to the same percentage that I expect to get profits? And at what point do we call it profit? Because is that gross profit, ka-ching, or swipe the card or what have you, and have we made profit? No. Have we made profit then? Well, no, we have bills to pay. And we have to reimburse from where we ordered product or where we paid rent. And so at what point in the operating agreement, we're going to define at what point do we declare this is where we're measuring profit from, this is where we're measuring expenses from.
Awesome. That's really good information. Operating agreement also indicates that, a lot of operating agreements will have a line in there that is, sometimes it's just one line, but it says, basically that the parties have had the opportunity to seek legal counsel. And that's a really important line, because it creates a presumption if there is a court dispute later that you could have gotten an attorney, but you chose not to get an attorney. So there's some things that you have to look for in operating agreements to understand how fair is it to me. Another thing is some operating agreements will reference other documents. So it may reference a loan agreement, but you're signing the loan agreement is merged automatically in the operating agreement. So it may be something that hasn't even been developed yet, but it's merged automatically by reference in the actual operating agreement. So that's something to pay attention to. Another thing to pay attention to is a management agreement being merged in the operating agreement by reference. So those are things that are really important for you to understand, because from an accounting perspective, if there's a management agreement that says any revenues 20%, 25%, 30%, and I don't think that's lawful and legal in New York State, but it may say $7,000, $10,000, $25,000 goes to this management company for them to run the business. What that is doing is, one, giving authority to that management company. It's taking the revenues from the top before it even gets to the calculations of net profits, which you would share in. And that can be done by reference in an operating agreement, referencing a document you haven't seen or haven't reviewed before. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those aspects of an operating agreement.
I'd like to jump in here for a second. Number one, we're using terminology that we are very comfortable with. And if you're not comfortable with it, feel free to just be like, or something, so we know, okay? You don't have to like let her, I hear you. So I'm just gonna break it down really quick, please. An operating agreement it's a contract as part of your business formation. That's all it is. It says how your business is run, okay? The big thing, see, your operating agreement could be like mine. Maria Granville says everything is, I mean, she's the head person in charge, and that's it, okay? Yeah, y'all know, y'all heard it, okay? But when it becomes important is when you have partners, investors, you have other individuals who are a part of your company. And that's something that we haven't spoken about yet, but you know, it takes a lot of money to start a cannabis business. That's why we're here. We're talking about a cannabis business. And when I say a lot of money, we may be talking about $1 million, $2 million. Now, are we talking about cash? Yes, because you can't borrow it from the bank.
Yeah.
Okay, so might need to bring in investors, partners. Those could be your uncle, cousins, you know, your neighbors. You canvass your building, you know, and everybody's like, yeah, I want to get into the cannabis business, but I don't actually want to start a business. Well, do you want to invest in mine? Fine. Okay, and there's rules along that line also. Or one of the MSOs, that stands for multi-state operators, MSOs, the big boys, come knocking at your door because they're looking for equity applicants. They are the ones who are going to create agreements that you will not sign. I'm telling all of y'all right now, if any of y'all talk to one of them, you will not sign the first agreement they present to you. You will take that agreement to an attorney
That you hire.
Okay. Because when we're talking about that operating agreement that says management this and what you didn't see that and that loan this, and it references all of those other documents that you may not have seen, but it looks good to you. You take the $1,000, the $2,000, whatever it takes to pay an attorney, and you make sure that that agreement is correct. And I can guarantee you, if you qualify as an equity applicant, somebody could conceivably be knocking at your door, ringing your phone, trying to get into, you know, your business. New York State is being very, very stringent. They do not want any of the big boys coming in and taking advantage of our social equity applicants. Okay, so they're going to be looking also. But you have to be diligent and understand what that is.
I want to ask that there are also private investors that will come and knock in as well, but just to give you an example of things I've seen dealing with the tax for cannabis companies, I have seen where operating agreements just trying to get money, because as Maria mentioned, is that it's going to take a lot of money. And people are going to offer you thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, to help you along the way. I have seen where people have given away their company and they didn't realize it.
Yep.
So they are not the controlling owner anymore.
Yep.
Or the agreement itself say if they don't make money to pay back certain percentage of the loan within 2 or 3 years, that person now owns the company.
Correct.
So those things you do have to be careful of what you sign and what's offered to you, because not all money is good money. So that's what I wanted to add.
And we've started using that word equity slightly differently. So there's social equity, and there's equity like in a corporation. And so two different uses of the same word.
Mhm.
And I saw a hand in the back.
We're gonna wait for the answer to the question.
Okay,
Yeah, so thank you for that. Great intro to the conversation about investors. So talking about investors, what should you have, let's say you're creating a binder, which eventually will become, parts of it will become your business plan. What things do you need to have to present to a potential investor? I know you need an EIN, you need to be formed as an entity already, typically. Having an operating agreement or shareholders agreement would be helpful. What are the other things that an investor is looking for to make you viable? And then we can talk a little bit about developing a business plan from there.
Well, if you don't have, if you're a budding business going into business, not an existing business, projections, your financial projections,
Let's talk about that.
pretty solid financial projections, or if you're just a business, of course, your financials up to date and how you've been doing so far.
So getting back to terminology. There's something called a pro forma. And if you type it, it always gives you the red line underneath, like you can never sign stuff. But it's called a pro forma. And that is where just pretty much, it's like a profit and loss. You list your anticipated income. And this goes for any business. So let's talk about, I don't know. Event space. Let's talk about rental event space. You're renting event space. We're renting this space for $150 an hour, right? We anticipate that we are going to be able to rent this space for 6, 12, 18, let's say 24 to 48 hours per week, right? At $175 an hour. So you do the math, $175 per hour times 48 hours equals however much money. That's how much income you expect to make, right? Now you stop and it's like, okay, how much are these lights costing me? How much is the electricity costing me? How much is the heat costing me? How much is my staff costing me? How much is all of this equipment costing me? But the equipment can be just depreciated because, you know, it's a capital cost, okay? So that's your pro forma. And then, so you have your income and you have your anticipated expenses, okay? And then you take that out, me personally, take that out 5 years. It's a 5-year projection, which is pretty simple because after you have year one, it's like, okay, how much is my, utilities gonna go up? 3% per year, 5% per year? How much do we anticipate my income going up? Well, obviously, you want your income to go up more than your expenses. So if your expenses are going up 3%, you want your income to go up 5%. Where you getting that? That's where your business plan comes in. But we're not talking about that right now. We're just talking about our financial projection. And that's called a pro forma.
Okay.
Any questions?
Just talking, going from the pro forma, can we take a step back and talk about how you calculate net profit? What's that formula? And if you get an agreement to get a percentage of gross profits, or you get an agreement to get a percentage of net profits, they're very different things. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so just to give you the basic formula of your profit and loss statement, it's your income or revenue minus your cost of goods sold. So for example, because we are talking about cannabis, cost of goods sold weighs heavily on somebody that's a cultivator or processor. And a cultivator is somebody that tends to grow the weed, that plants actually, they handle the weed. Processor would be someone that converts the plant to something else, whether it's an oil, whether you make an edible, or you do some sort of infused food or something like that. The third most popular is retail, which is a dispensary. Now, dispensary doesn't have much cost of goods sold. And if you really think about it, a dispensary is in the business of selling selling, period. It's a retail operation, so you're really selling the weed, so you're going to have the highest gross profit. So now we have rental income minus cost of goods sold. That will equal your gross profit. That's where you're taxed at as a cannabis business. A traditional business now goes a step further. You have your normal business expenses, your rent, your, your utility, all those other business expenses can be applied. And then that's your net income. So of course, a regular business has more advantages, a cannabis business. We're behind the 8 ball because we are paying at that top level, gross profit line.
Excellent. And, the most simple way of defining net profits is revenues minus expenses equals net profits. And that's something that you should know as a formula. And if you're being compensated in a contract by a percentage of net profits, it's very distinct from a percentage of gross profits. And in that net profits calculation, if that is how you agree to be compensated, you need to understand who controls the expenses. Is my investor's salary part of the expenses that has to be paid before I get any money? Is their, paying for their real estate an expense that comes out of the profits before I get any money? So in looking at forming these organizations, you need to understand what's going to go into the revenues, but really importantly, what am I agreeing to? Who has control over? What say do I have as far as what is going to be a legitimate expense that gets taken out of the profits before I even get any of the money? And that's why I want to kind of highlight that. Now, Paula, let's talk about business plans and attracting an investor. Can you talk high level about components of a business plan and things that they should prepare for? And I think it takes us back to your question about you have to know what your vision is, what you're trying to do, right? So I'll let you lead with that.
Okay, so where I was going earlier was I talked to so many people about their cannabis dreams. And they want what I call the Walmart superstore of cannabis. In other words, they want a place where we're growing it on the rooftop and we're processing it in the basement. And we've got a nice consumption lounge where you can also, chill out and watch television and order pizza and we're selling medicinal herbs in the front, and so critical to your business plan is know what the license requirements are. And once those come out, and that is our frustration in New York State, because we honestly don't know much about the license requirements yet, even after today's news. But once you have that, then you're ready to work out some of those pro forma figures and incorporate that information into a document known as a business plan. We are getting this license. We have this amount of money already invested. We know that it will cost per month or per week even to operate this business X amount of dollars. And therefore, at this time, we are opening an investment round that will last until April, and we need $5 million.
And can you touch upon the importance of a non-disclosure agreement when you are presenting your dream, your vision, you're handing it over in the form of a business plan? How important that is?
So you don't want to give away your secrets. You don't want to say, oh yeah, I've got dibs on this property over here. If I can just get the money, because you don't want somebody else to read that and say, that was a great business plan. Let's you and I do that. So you want to make sure that somebody signs what's called an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which says whatever information they get to you, what is your secret sauce? What is it that makes your business special? Why do you think you have something to bring to the market as opposed to somebody else? And that needs to be in the business plan because that's what's going to attract the investor. But on the other hand, you don't want to give away your secret. And in order to do that, you make them sign a non-disclosure agreement, and don't be at all surprised if they ask you to do the same, because they will be opening up their financial statements and their business to you as well.
Excellent. So, you know, we've gone on a journey and kind of talked about forming your entity, and keep in mind, you know, some of you already have your entity formed. And so we talked a little bit about how to incorporate some new person, maybe they're an investor, maybe they bring some knowledge from Colorado, California, how do you incorporate them into your business? And we talked about, you know, developing your business plan, which has components about, you know, your company info, you know, who's your team, your pro forma and your financials. What does the competition look like? Who are your competitors? What's your product mix if you have a product? What does it look like? And what's your pathway to profitability? And that's all really important. And that's why we want to make sure this session is in two portions. So we give general information, and then you can have individual conversations with our kind volunteer panelists, and they're willing to share their expertise. I think a good place to close out before we move on to questions from the audience in general is talking about taxation and 280E. So, you know, sometimes entities they'll file for their EIN, they get a letter back from the IRS, has the EIN number, but what if it says, hey, you need to file every quarter? You know, so I thought I only filed every year. You know, sometimes there are different distinctions there. So let's talk about taxation, filing tax returns, the frequency of it, and the Rule 280E, which is very important for cannabis at this time, and hopefully when the Safe Banking Act passes or a similar act, there's another bill that was filed, I think it's called the Climb Act. Once one of those acts passes, and again, the holdup for the Safe Banking Act isn't necessarily that Congress doesn't want to pass the Safe Banking Act, but there are certain congressional leaders that are holding firm and saying, we're not giving the bank what they want until you address the issue of criminal justice reform. And that's really what the holdup is, just so everyone's on the same page, but there's opportunity for compromise on both sides. So I hand it to you ladies to talk about taxation, filing taxes, 280E. We can even talk a little bit about state taxes on cannabis as well.
I'll jump in first because I do tax work a lot. And I struggle with people who still don't understand that I pay my IRS taxes and I pay my New York State taxes. You know, they'll get a letter from New York State and say, oh, the IRS is going to take everything. And I'm like, no, I don't see anything IRS. And it turns out it's New York State. So the first thing, get those two. You've got a New York State return, you've got an IRS return as a cannabis business owner before you can even apply for it. They have already told us you need to open up a sales tax portal. And you can do that online. There is a process to go through it. And you can expect to pay quarterly sales taxes. And that is in compliance with the law. As was passed in the MRTA. So remember that the motivation for governments to even legalize has very little to do with people. It has to do with tax money.
So one thing I just want to say before we go to questions is, as the panelists have indicated throughout the conversation, a lot of this information does vary based on license type. So to Paul's point about, you really have to know what you're trying to do and what type of license you want to get, what type of experience you have, and what type of experience you need to be successful. And that'll affect everything you do from an accounting perspective. I'd like to open up the floor for questions of our first. I'd like a round of applause for our panel. For questions from the audience related to you know, whether it's legal related, because we do have Paul as a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, accounting related, consultation, whether it's traditional business or a cannabis business specifically. So any questions? Yes, sir, in the back. Yes, sir.
All right, my question is regarding the 280E. It's my understanding that in other states, I believe New Jersey, the requirement for both licensing and taxation was to file a 280E and basically present that you've been operating in the cannabis space and making sales pre-license. Okay, basically admitting that you were breaking the law. And I was told, and you correct me if that's wrong advice, that was advantageous to them in moving forward in a licensed cannabis space. Now, is that gonna take place in New York? Because I heard that New York may or may not follow that. And do you advise a company, how do you advise a company right now, a cannabis company that's not necessarily making sales with the intent on being legally, licensed? How should they move with in terms of tax, filing taxes right now? What's the best way to move?
I could explain, what you may have kind of heard. 280E is the tax code governing cannabis businesses on the federal level. That's where we talk about that you are taxed at the gross profit instead of the net. Because it's non-deductible. It's because of 280E. Now, what I know has transpired in other states.
Sorry,
Yes.
Can you talk about 280E and why it's not deductible, that it has to do with illicit? It's
Right,
not-
it's
It's
okay.
not only about cannabis.
Yeah, so, cannabis just happens to be lumped with other Schedule I substances and considered federally illegal. So you cannot benefit from the sale of that. You can only take the cost of it. So that's where that law comes from. And that's why you pay the highest tax, even though you may not, your bank account legally do not reflect that. With that being said, in other states, what I know of when they're going for licensing, it's not that you have to file a tax return and admit per se. In some instances, I know of people that have, and it is advantageous in the respect that you take that experience and you say you have experience doing this and you can run this business. But that goes along with the social equity of you being incarcerated before, and that moves with that license. Other states have not forced people to do that. If you have been in the industry and you have another business, like you're a barber, or you have to be compliant and have all your taxes filed to date. So you can't be in business as something else and not paying taxes and then try and go for the cannabis license. You have to be compliant with taxes. So if you have some other business that you do, you just have to be compliant with your taxes.
Yes, it's great.
Just to be specific, there is a current program that's happening today that pretty much everybody is talking about, or yeah. We're all talking to you based on that process that New York State has announced. But it is not the end. It is only, it's not even the beginning. It is New York State's attempt to do better than the rest of the country when it comes to social equity applicants. So just to be clear, so everyone understands what that process is, there's 100 to 200 licenses. The first 100 to 200 licenses are going to be awarded to justice-involved individuals. Those are individuals who have an arrest, we are asking for that, or a conviction for the 221, 421, 221, 221. Okay, those individuals, they want you to have at least a 10% ownership in a company that has 2 years of profit. Okay, essentially what they're doing, and that's for all of New York State. So they've made it very difficult to get one of these 100 to 200 licenses. But these licenses, they are, the dormitory authority is finding the location for your dispensaries. So you don't need to do that. They're gonna find it for you. They are building it out for you. They are actually hiring the architects and the contractors to build out the space. So they are handing you a key, and they're paying for all of that. You're still going to need some money, but you know, they're doing the 80% and you're going to need the 20%. And it's huge, but it's only 100 to 200 licenses. That's it, for the entire state of New York. So I can guarantee you that, you know, I mean, even if you met all of the criteria, you've been arrested, you've been convicted, you have a successful barbershop, your barbershop makes $100,000 a year, net, okay? But somebody else's liquor store or whatever makes 200,000. Now they have 250 licenses. How are they gonna get down to the 100, the 150, the 200? You know, they're gonna start weeding people out, even those who qualify. That doesn't stop you from getting a license in the future. It is just for this little ground that's actually supposed to be licensed and up and running by December 2022. After that, there's gonna be more licenses. This is just, thousands. This is just this first step out the door, because New York State wants to say that their social equity program is the best in the country. And quite frankly, they're doing better than everybody else has. I mean, I can't complain. So, you know, we didn't get everything we wanted. I mean, and just to let you know, Regina Smith and HDA at the leading edge of insisting that the MRTA and the regulations contained language that supported Black entrepreneurs being the first and having the biggest opportunity to be profitable. So that's what we're talking about, but there is a future. But for this, up until like December 2022, you know, first quarter 2023, we're talking about those 100 to 200 dispensary licenses. There's also cultivator licenses that they're doing, which is grows, cultivators and grows. That's happening right now.
I want to close out the response to this gentleman's question. I'd like 6 jobs, but I also work for a background screening company that works for licensees for their employees, but also Cannabis Commission. So we have a contract with Massachusetts CCC, have a contract with Vermont. I've talked to the Connecticut Social Equity Council and presented to them. I presented in Michigan. And one thing you need to understand as far as application review, there are 4 key components for application review. The first one is background screening and ensuring that there aren't any disqualifying offenses based on the statute. So there's some criminality that tie kind of into social equity. There's some criminality that may fall under disqualifying offenses. So there's that part of the background screening process, part of the application screening process. So that's the first component. Because then once you don't meet that gate, you're just not going to you're not going to get a license until the statute changes. The second part is looking at education and experience. So you may have experience cultivating and also have an agronomy degree. That happens all the time. Or you may have experience cultivation and it was hard to document because it was on the illicit side, but you're making a persuasive argument that you should get a license because I have this experience. So that's the second component that you want to really consider for your application, beef up for your application, is your education and your experience. And at this point in the legalization process across the country, there is an understanding that some of that experience will be out of state, possibly. Some of that experience may have been in the illicit industry. The third part is, and this has been kind of like an evolution of legalization over time. The third part is does the state have a social equity program? If it does, then that's the third part of social equity. And really understanding what are the criteria for social equity in this state. Some states it turns on being a veteran, some states it turns on being based on race. Some states have said, we're not using race because of, a holding in another state. We want to make it more secure, and we're going to go to, Title 49 of federal code, which talks about social and economically disadvantaged. And then some states will say disparately impacted areas down to a zip code. So then if there's social equity is legal in the state, then you're going to look at social equity as that third portion of review. And then the fourth portion is the most recent. It's like a spin-off from social equity, and it's based on the predatory practices that we've seen across the country. And it's looking at ownership and control, which in the past, a lot of states didn't look at. And that's why you had a lot of those straw man situations where it'd be like a brown face, but the money's the ones, the money people are the ones controlling everything. And then a lot of states are starting to look at, I see that you have the social equity person, but do they really make any decisions? Do they really own the company? We have a 51% requirement, but how involved are they in the business? And that's what states are starting to really expand on for the protection of the applicant. We're seeing it in New Jersey, we're seeing it in Connecticut, we're seeing it in New York, as far as just the regulators, whether it's a Cannabis Control Board or Cannabis Control Commission or state regulators, really looking at, no, we want to understand a little bit more and request an operating agreement and any related agreements. We want to understand, we may interview the applicant to understand how much do you know about how the business operates. So those are the 4 review components for a typical cannabis application. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that. So as you're building your application, think in those buckets as far as being as persuasive as possible. So you can get as many points as possible, even though the point setup will be different, for every application. Those are like the 4 main buckets to go in thinking about. Will I pass the background check as far as disqualifying offenses? That's a non-negotiable. How can I demonstrate the experience of myself, or if I'm lacking experience, get someone on my team who has experience to kind of beef up this application? If it's a social equity state like New York is, based on the work of HBA and other organizations, do I qualify for a social equity benefit or priority? And then the fourth is, let's demonstrate that the people who are supposed, that legislative intent wanted to benefit because of the criminalization of cannabis and the price they paid. Let's make sure they have some ownership and control of the business. And that's a typical review process. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one in the Zoom about the card licenses. Can a couple who both have cannabis charges and own a company with the 80-20 split apply for 2 licenses?
One entity, 2 different licenses for 2 different people.
Yeah.
It would turn on whether they're applying as individuals or applying as a company, but I'll let Nicole have any insight on that.
I guess I would want to see how what were they hoping to accomplish with the 2 licenses? And why not form 2 separate companies, like his and hers, or hers and hers? So you need to look at what are the goals, and why were they thinking of having 1 company with 2 licenses instead of 2 companies, each with 1 license?
Because the profitability history of 2 years, I think, might be a factor.
Okay. Yeah, so we would need to sit down and analyze what's going on there.
She says she has 2 separate companies created currently. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And I saw a hand over there, and then you, sir, over in the corner. Yes, please.
I had 2 questions. The first one was about the NDA, like how specific does that language have to be? Can I just find a template online, or do I actually need to sit down and have a consultation with a lawyer to give really detailed, language for that NDA when I'm sharing my business plan or something?
Well, if you ask a lawyer's going to tell you you need a lawyer approved NDA. You will find them online, but make sure that they, like anything that you find online, read it and make sure it applies to your unique situation. Are you trying to protect your grow process? Are you trying to protect where your product comes from? Any of that information, make sure it's in there.
Okay, so go to work.
Yeah.
My second
I'll
question,
just add, can I add one thing to that? There are great templates online, but I'm just gonna call out some things to be cautious of. So, and I always like an NDA that is a mutual NDA. So it talks about the parties, and either party can be the disclosure and the receiver. What you don't want is a NDA that has been developed, drafted by the other party, and they're saying, we're the disclosure and you're the receiver, because that way it doesn't work both ways. So when you're sharing information to them, you don't have protection. If you have a mutual NDA, then it doesn't matter who's sharing information, there's protection. One other point, if you're being presented with an NDA is, watch out for like a liquidated damages clause. And I want to explain that. If it says, when you look at the damages section, usually the damage, so if you violate the NDA, does it say remedy, go to court, blah, 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 arbitration, blah, blah, blah? Or does it say, if you violate, then you owe $1 million? Or if you violate, you owe $200,000. I've seen them. So you just need to make sure you understand that, who the parties are, make sure that the other party that you actually Google to make sure they're a real entity. So either it's a person you're dealing with, or it's an entity that actually exists under law. Because if it's violated, who are you going to sue if you don't have the true entity name? So those are just a few caution points on an NDA.
okay, my second question was, around the nonprofit space. Do you have any information on that, any like details? Because not a lot of it has been said about how they plan on carving out a nonprofit space for cannabis.
Correct. You want to talk about that?
It can, in what we learned from the card, they're looking at the mission of that nonprofit. Was it dedicated to the community, or was it dedicated, there would not have been a nonprofit that was cannabis related, but let's say you ran a nonprofit that was trying to encourage literacy in a particular neighborhood. So making sure that your nonprofit's mission was dedicated to public good, public benefit. On the NDA, I've seen some that say neither party will disclose anything to anybody ever. And that's like so broad that nobody can live with it, and so it's useless from its inception.
Okay,
Certain event.
Going back to what you're saying about background screening.
Yes.
What are, marijuana convictions or even arrests, or even bundled up with other things like resisting arrest, there might be other drugs involved, small amounts of cocaine or something from years ago. And I haven't heard anything from the CCB or the OCM about what they're going to do with applicants that have multiple charges on their arrest that don't relate to marijuana, but the marijuana is the main underlying offense. How are they going to be treating that? And I know that the card application has a section that they'll disqualify you for bad moral character, and I'm wondering if that. If those other offenses- Yeah, and it hasn't been defined, but to those, are they expecting those, maybe other offenses to be considered bad moral character? And I'm just wondering.
That's a great question. We have no knowledge of what they're going to do. But what I can say is there are commissions across the country, because I listen to a lot of cannabis commissions, that are starting to have a conversation about what if it wasn't just a marijuana charge? What if it was resisting arrest or something like that? So those conversations are happening. I haven't seen it really executed, but they are saying that there are a lot of related charges. Also, I want to be clear that the burden is on the applicant to demonstrate their eligibility for social equity criteria. So you as an individual may have to research the original arrest record. So maybe with a crack conviction, but marijuana was also involved in things like that. But it would be, the burden would be on the applicant to, one, get information about that, whether it's the court records, whether it's the arrest records. You would have to do that research and then create a narrative around that research to present the best possible case that marijuana was what created the probable cause or the reason for the stop. And hopefully that was demonstrated in the actual arrest record, police report, et cetera. But I'm gonna let the other panelists.
Correct me if I'm wrong, a second illicit drug was disqualified, right?
Yeah,
That was
unfortunately,
of cocaine that was disqualified.
the other thing that,
If it wasn't, it wasn't a conviction though, what if they weren't? So it would have turned on the conviction.
oh, it would have to be a conviction, but, you know, what I'm seeing a lot are people who they had the marijuana, but then there was a gun there, and so somehow there was a gun charge that was wrapped up into it, and, you know, we all know that that was how it was handled, you know, and it's really, really, we're still dealing with justice issues, okay? It's very much a work in progress.
I did attend a session where the Bronx and Manhattan DAs had representatives. And they spent a decent amount of time talking about expungement. And not only the automatic expungement for the easy marijuana convictions, but expungements of other convictions. Quiet as it's kept, apparently you can petition to have certain convictions and arrests expunged from your record. So that's something that you may want to look up. They actually had a decent, long conversation about it. You know, there's an application process, and I think everyone is allowed to seek expungement. So, and even if you are successful in getting your record expunged, your marijuana conviction on that record still qualifies you to be a social equity applicant.
Any questions? Yes. And
Did you hear,
take the next two and then roll into our question, our individual.
was there any feedback on the prices of the licenses, the 100 licenses that you said? Is there any feedback on the prices of those? Because the initial licensing was pretty hefty.
The application fees.
Yeah, application fee and then license, yes.
The application fee, as I understand it, is $2,000
For the car,
Really?
not for the other license.
Yeah, just remember,
And I think for the.
we're only talking about those
cultivation,
100 to 200 licenses.
The cultivation, that's not a general corporate cultivation license, that's only the.
It is for the.
Too, yeah.
So it's $2,000 currently, just for this 100 to 200 licenses that we're talking about, only for the dispensary. It's $2,000 for the application fee. I don't know what other fees come after that.
But there's feedback on everything, and I don't know if you've been paying attention in New Jersey, and some of their license types are lower cost than 2,000. So there's been feedback, you know, I'm sure you understand they're reviewing public comment for the next round. I don't know if someone submitted that as a particular item in their public comment. I know I reviewed a number of organizations, and that really wasn't a point. There was more about, let's look at the justice involved definition and some other things. But I'm sure somebody said something about the pricing. What they're gonna do with that information is yet to be determined. So I hope that's helpful.
I want to add that
Yeah.
historically across the country, when there's a medical marijuana state, when they go retail, the price doesn't change. And I know in New York, it's like 200,000 on the medical marijuana side. Hopefully, as progressive as New York has been, they take a look at that and consider that as they go forward with the traditional licenses, but we don't know yet. That's the honest to God.
There was one more question. I can't remember. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the taxation. So on the federal side, because it's still considered an illicit substance, there is you're being taxed growth. But since New York has made it legal, are you still being taxed at the growth on the state side, or are you being taxed at your net profit?
You're being taxed, you get more deduction on the state
On the
side.
state.
Yes, because it's legal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great question. We'll go to great questions from all the audience. One more round of applause, please. I think it's, we just want to close out this section, and I'd like to say thank you again to the Harlem Business Alliance for being our host for today. Thank you to our panelists. And we're gonna continue to do these types of, collaborations, these cross-profession collaborations to prepare people for what's coming next. The Justice Foundation, Harlem Business Alliance, New York, the consortium of cannabis accountants, we all have programming plans, some of it together, some of it separate. But I really want you to sign up for the distribution list if you're not on it for the Harlem Business Alliance. I have my card here, I'll give out, so you can connect to me as Justice Foundation for our programming, and the New York consortium of cannabis accountants. Please get their contact information as well. I think this is an appropriate time to close out the Zoom if there aren't any more questions on the Zoom. And then those who are present, if you would like one-on-one time with one of our accountants, you can raise your hand and we'll try to find a quiet space for you to have that conversation. Is there anyone who would like one-on-one with the accountant? So I'm seeing about 5 hands, and yeah, they're gonna be short sessions, but 5 hands, so we'll try to set people up in different areas where they have, so give us a moment to kind of move things around so that you have that private time. So thank you all for coming.
Yes, ma'am.
How about electronic one? You know? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Unfortunately, anyone behind our. No, I've got an interview too.
August thing.
We didn't work for it. I aspire to be a corporate president.
And it's on the ABC for FOC.
So the folks was on the back, and the website is just on select.com. Well,